Finally, after all these years, I've discovered seasoning. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and today is all about the Season of Discovery. We'll talk about how the launch went, how the discovery aspect of the season is working out, and the rune system in particular. We'll go over what there is to love about this season and what maybe hasn't worked out so great. Quick summary for anyone who's not familiar. Season of Discovery is a new set of servers for classic WoW that adds new systems, raids, and other content. And through the new rune system, you can get a bunch of perks and abilities that weren't originally available in classic. Some of these even allow new roles for certain classes, like mages becoming healers and warlocks becoming tanks. They're also rolling it out in phases at lower level caps with a miniaturized endgame at each one of those level caps. So right now in phase 1, we're capped at level 25. And they've converted Black Fathom Deeps into a 25-player raid instance with completely redesigned encounters and rewards. The general gist of the idea is to take Classic and just sort of plus it up a bit. See what I did there? By adding to it in ways that still feel appropriate for Classic, but give people who love Classic gameplay something new to do. So, how's it going so far? I'm going to take a second to talk about the launch itself because they did some interesting things. For starters, they didn't release server names ahead of time. Now, I would guess that this is at least partially an attempt to break up the quote-unquote mega server issue by making it harder to know where major guilds or big streamers are going to be playing. This is a real problem, and I'm glad that Blizzard is trying things to try and alleviate that somewhat. I'm just not really sure that hiding the server names has affected that in any appreciable way. Like, realistically, it only took a few seconds once the realm list was available for that kind of information to spread, and we still have the mega servers. What I think did help was the faction balance lock. Once a server in Season of Discovery has too many players on one faction, you actually can't create characters of that faction until it balances out a bit more. Now, we don't know a lot about how this is working under the hood. For example, I would assume that it's not just counting the number of characters that exist for a given faction, because that would just be way too easy to manipulate. We also don't know what level of variance it allows. Like, does it lock at 60% or 70% or whatever? Does it take player activity into account? And if so, at what point are you considered inactive? But at least at launch, this made it impossible for one server to just become completely full of one faction because that's where the popular streamers went. Like, if you wanted to play on Crusader Strike on day one, where the OTK crew is playing Alliance, you either had to pick Horde or wait. Now, there was still a queue, obviously, but it was a queue of Horde and Alliance players. That's an improvement, at least. It'll still take some time before we know how it works out long term, but for now, it seems to be doing its job. Otherwise, launch went about how you'd expect, with thousands of players swarming each starting zone and camping spawn points for quest mobs. What was extra cool to see was when the discovery aspect started to come into play. You'd be questing along and suddenly come across some item or NPC that you hadn't seen before, which would usually have some sort of clue to it, what it was about. Following those clues would lead to the discovery of some new rune, which you could then slot onto your gear for a new ability. And that, with some notable exceptions, which, don't worry, I'll get to those, has overall worked really well. The clues are usually enough to point you in the right direction, and sometimes even hint towards other things that you might want to look for in the future. There was also a lot of shared discovery happening, where someone would find one part of something and mention it in chat, and someone else would go, oh, I bet you used that over here at this other thing that I found. Or someone would say, hey, I found this NPC here, but I can't do anything with them, but I bet a warrior could, or whatever. There's been this really cool mix where some discoveries you'll probably figure it out yourself as you go without any issue. Some you might happen across something that you needed, or you might need to ask around a bit. And some were very clearly designed to need whole groups of people investigating before they'd be figured out and then posted online for others. And I want to be clear that all three approaches are completely fine. If you want to just look everything up from the beginning, that's your choice. Play the game in the way that you're going to enjoy playing it. And if you want to, turn off all chats, play completely solo, and try to find everything yourself, that's also fine. Just be warned that some of these discoveries were made with the intention, very clearly, that it would take multiple people working together to figure it out, so you might miss some things. Personally, I've been having fun just discovering as much as I can myself, and then looking up some stuff later when I feel like I've done about as much of my own exploring as I'm going to enjoy, at least for that character. And I've honestly been having a blast. I'm completely hooked on Season of Discovery. Major props to the Classic team. It's incredible. That said, there are a few things I'd like to see improved on. I'll start with some of those notable exceptions I mentioned earlier. There's a few runes where I feel the discovery mechanic has been unpleasant. I'll toss a quick spoiler warning here, because I'm going to be talking about some discovery mechanics for runes for all classes, but most specifically certain Warlock, Druid, Rogue, and Mage runes. I'll take the warning down once I'm done if you want to mute and skip through. We'll start with the Warlock just because this is the one you've most likely heard about already. The Metamorphosis rune, which is required if you want to tank as a Warlock, has been kind of a mess. At first, it was apparently just bugged, and the items needed for one of the steps just weren't dropping at all. That got hotfixed, but then they only dropped from trash mobs in Black Fathom Deeps, which is now a 10-player raid instance. So if you were a Warlock wanting to tank, you had to do the raid as a DPS because you couldn't tank yet. Now that's also been hotfixed now by essentially adding some of those trash mobs to the area outside of the raid instance. And when that hotfix went out, Blizzard included a developer note saying it wasn't our original intent for discoveries to take you into raid instances. Now, before we side-eye that statement too much, it is possible, and I would say likely, that they're telling the truth. My hunch is that the Metamorphosis rune and its corresponding quests were created before BFD was converted into a raid. So the original intent in that case was that you would need to do the 5-player version of BFD to get these quest items. Considering that the other part of this same quest requires you to do Shadowfang Keep, that tracks. Then, later on in development, BFD was converted into a raid, and the 5-player version of those trash mobs was no longer accessible. They still exist in the game's data, players just can't get to them. So the first hotfix was someone going, oh, this drop is on the old mob's loot table, I need to move it to the new one. And then the second hotfix was the team going, wait, hang on a second. This means that Warlocks have to do the raid to get this rune, and we didn't want that to be a thing. That all seems completely feasible to me. That said, if my hunch here is correct, and even if it isn't, why is a rune that Warlocks need to tank dungeons locked behind completing the highest level dungeons in Phase 1? Like, even if I'm wrong about the 5-player BFD thing, you still have to do Shadowfang Keep, which you're gonna need a tank for. And it's not like this rune just bumps up your health or something. It's literally required for tanking. Without it, you have no threat generation, no damage mitigation, and no taunt. You're better off letting a hunter pet tank. It just seems really dumb to require Warlocks who want to try tanking to have first completed the Phase 1 content they want to be tanking. It'd be like if, I don't know, you locked flying behind completing all Outdoor World content or something. And it's not just Warlocks stuck in this situation. They're probably the worst example, but there's a few others. Mage healers and Druid tanks both have a very important rune locked behind a quest that requires a bunch of a new item created by high-level engineers that also requires a bunch of high-level resources. Now, when I say high-level in this case, I mean level 25, and obviously that's still not nearly as bad, but you're still not likely to complete it until you've been level 25 for a while, which means you've probably already done most of what you wanted the rune for in the first place. And rogue tanks have a rune that's just as mandatory as Metamorphosis for Warlocks, locked behind a new rep grind, which is not great. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind that it's a grind. The whole classic experience is basically grinding for stuff. That's fine. The problem is that this grind is 90% travel time. And I'm going to talk about that grind in a second, but to summarize this segment, all of the runes that make classes able to play new roles should have been available much earlier. It sucks that some of the new roles aren't really playable until you're mostly done with Phase 1. Okay, spoiler warning off. Welcome back if you were waiting. Let's talk about the new reputation grind, the Azeroth Commerce Authority for Alliance, or Durotar Supplies and Logistics for Horde. So basically, there are these waylaid supplies crates that can be dropped or can be found in chests. And you can turn those in a major city for reputation. The crates give a small amount of rep as is, but they all say that they're missing something. So if you add in what they're missing, you get about 3 to 4 times as much rep. The problem is these crates are unique. You can only be carrying one at a time. So So if you're trying to grind out this rep, the gameplay is basically go to a place with a bunch of mobs and chests, loot things until you get a crate, which in the right areas usually only takes about a couple minutes, and then go back to a major city to turn it in. Worse, there's multiple tiers of these crates, and only the higher tier ones will give you any rep pass friendly, and those only drop in higher level zones. So you can't just pop out of Stormwind and kill a few Defias or whatever. You've got to keep flying back and forth from someplace like Red Ridge or Duskwood. So the problem isn't that it's a grind. The problem is that you spend the majority of this grind AFK on a flight path instead of playing the game. Now, they did put out a hotfix that made it so you could carry multiple completed chests, but that honestly changed almost nothing. In order to realistically make use of that, you would have to either be carrying 21 different sets of materials or constantly deleting every crate that you can't easily complete yourself. Which, by the way, there are some, shall we say, creative workarounds that some people have found by using the item restore feature, but I somehow doubt that's the intended method. What I'd love to see for this reputation is just more of the turn-in NPCs. Put one in every zone. Hell, put one in every inn. That would at least let us turn in the incomplete crates for some rep instead of just deleting the ones that aren't worth the time. Overall, though, and all gripes aside, Season of Discovery has been absolutely wonderful, and I am super excited to see what comes next. And we'll be talking about it more here next week as well, probably chatting more about the raid, which is super fun, by the way, and maybe looking forward to the future a bit to think about where Season of Discovery can go next. Another thing I've been thinking about for this show is to try to wrap up each episode by answering a question or two that you all have left in the YouTube comments. And we had a really good one on the first episode from Branded Wolf, who asked, what are some good base mods for Season of Discovery? And this was an interesting one to think about because it kind of depends on how much of a quote unquote classic experience you're looking for. A lot of mods add things that didn't exist in Classic, and there weren't mods that did it in Classic, but are quality of life features that were added later on in the game's life cycle. Like personally, right away, I'd recommend Questy. It essentially adds icons on your map and minimap for quests that tell you where to go, which didn't exist in Classic, but was added later on. And I know some people really love that you had to carefully read the quest text in the original game to figure out where you were supposed to go and what to do. And hey, for each their own. For me, that's just a lot of tedium that makes the game less enjoyable. A couple others I'd recommend are Auctionator to make the auction house more user-friendly. Character stats classic, so you can tell things like how much crit chance or spell power you have more easily, and some kind of bag add-on. I personally use Addy bags, but there are a lot of options available. I'll also pretty much always suggest weak auras. Just there's so much you can do with it once you learn it, and even if you don't, you can probably find a weak aura that someone else made that does what you're looking for. Anyway, I think we'll wrap up here. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, or just a general topic you'd like to see me hit up, leave a comment. Let me know. I've got several set aside from last week already that I'm starting to plan for, but there's always room for more. Don't forget, you can find me pretty much anywhere on the internet under the name Devolore. That's DEVOLORE. Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. You can find me under the name Devolore. And of course, we must praise the algorithm. So if you could toss a subscribe or a like on this video, I would really, really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.